Catherine Price stared at the letter in her hands, her fingers trembling against the crisp paper as the morning sunlight illuminated the cruel words that would forever change her life. Her own father had arranged for her to be sent away to an institution for the deaf and disabled in Colorado Territory, declaring her presence an unfortunate burden upon the families standing in Boston society. The year was 1875, and at 20 years of age, Catherine had spent the last 8 years in near complete isolation since the scarlet fever had stolen her hearing. Once a vibrant, educated young woman with prospects of a suitable marriage, she had become what her mother quietly referred to as damaged goods in hushed conversations Catherine could only understand by reading lips, a skill she had taught herself in secret. Catherine folded the letter carefully and placed it in her satchel. Her father had not even bothered to tell her in person. Instead, he had written it down like a business transaction and had one of the servants deliver it to her room. She was to be sent west on the train in 3 days' time to a place called Silverdale. The journey would take weeks, and she would be escorted by her father's assistant, Mr. Reynolds, a stern man who had always looked at Catherine with a mixture of pity and discomfort. 3 days later, Catherine stood on the platform of Boston's South Station, her mother dabbing at dry eyes with a lace handkerchief while her father checked his pocket watch repeatedly. He had not looked directly at her once since they'd arrived. "The train departs in 5 minutes, Mr. Reynolds announced, taking Catherine's elbow with gloved fingers as though her deafness might somehow be contagious. Catherine pulled away sharply, her green eyes flashing with defiance. She may not have been able to hear, but she was perfectly capable of boarding a train without being handled like cargo. Her mother flinched at the display of independence, glancing nervously at the other travelers to see if anyone had noticed. "Catherine," her father said, finally meeting her gaze, his lips forming the words with exaggerated clarity so she could read them. "This is for the best. They will know how to care for someone in your condition." She knew what he really meant. They would know how to hide her away. Catherine straightened her back, lifted her chin, and with deliberate movements, raised her hands to respond in the rudimentary sign language she had taught herself from a book hidden beneath her mattress. Her father immediately grabbed her wrists, pulling them down. "Not here," he hissed, his face reddening. "Have you no shame?" Catherine met his gaze steadily, then reached for her small notebook and pencil in her pocket. She wrote quickly, her penmanship impeccable despite her shaking hands, "I am your daughter, not a scandal to be shipped away." Her father read the words, his jaw tightening before he folded the paper and tucked it into his waistcoat pocket. "The conductor is signaling. It is time to board." Catherine turned away, refusing the awkward embrace her mother attempted. She walked toward the waiting train, her steps measured and dignified, carrying only one trunk of personal belongings and the knowledge that she had been discarded by those who should have loved her most. The journey west was a blur of changing landscapes, endless hours of rocking train cars, and nights spent staring out windows at unfamiliar stars. Mr. Reynolds barely acknowledged her except to escort her to dining cars or new connections. Catherine passed the time by writing in her journal and observing the passengers around her. She noticed how they spoke animatedly to one another, laughing and sharing stories she could never hear. The silence that had once been her prison now felt like armor against the rejection she had endured. After nearly 2 weeks of travel, they arrived at the final station before their destination. Catherine stepped onto the wooden platform of a dusty frontier town, the air hot and dry compared to Boston's coastal climate. "Mr. Reynolds arranged for a stagecoach to take them the remaining 30 miles to Silverdale, where the Western School for the Deaf and Infirm awaited. The stagecoach journey was brutal, the unpaved roads sending them bouncing against the hard seats. When they finally arrived in Silverdale as dusk was falling, Catherine was exhausted and disheveled. The town was small, just a collection of wooden buildings lining a main street with a church steeple rising above the other structures. Mr. Reynolds led her to a 2-story building set apart from the town, its windows small and uninviting. A weathered sign read Western School for the Deaf and Infirm ESD, 1867. As they approached, Catherine noticed the iron fence surrounding the property and the distinct lack of people outside despite the pleasant evening weather. A stern-faced woman in a high-collared black dress greeted them at the door, her eyes assessing Catherine like she was inspecting damaged goods. "I am Mrs. Winters, the matron," she said, her thin lips moving precisely. "Mr. Reynolds, I have the final payment documents in my office." Catherine stood in the foyer, clutching her small valise as Mr. Reynolds followed Mrs. Winters down a hallway. Looking around, she saw bare walls and plain wooden floors. The air smelled of carbolic soap and something else to spare. A young woman in a gray uniform appeared, gesturing for Catherine to follow. Her new room was tiny, with a narrow bed, a small dresser, and a single window with bars on the outside. Catherine's trunk had already been delivered and sat unopened at the foot of the bed. Mrs. Winters returned alone. "Mr. Reynolds has departed," she said, speaking slowly as if Catherine were simple-minded rather than deaf. "You will be expected to follow our schedule precisely. Morning bell is at 6, breakfast at 6:30. Work assignments begin at 7. We do not tolerate idleness or disobedience." Catherine reached for her notebook, but Mrs. Winters snatched it away. "We do not encourage written communication. It breeds dependency and laziness. You will learn proper hand signs with the others." She turned to leave, then stopped at the door. "Your father has paid for 5 years. I suggest you make the best of it." The door closed with a heavy thud, and Catherine heard the unmistakable sound of a key turning in the lock. She sank onto the bed, finally allowing the tears she had been holding back for days to fall freely. The reality of her situation crashed over her like a wave. She was imprisoned, abandoned, and completely alone. The next morning came too quickly. Catherine was awakened by a young woman shaking her shoulder roughly. A bell must have rung, though Catherine couldn't hear it. She was given a gray dress identical to the ones worn by the other women she had glimpsed the previous evening, and led to a dining hall where about 30 residents sat at long tables, eating in near silence. Catherine observed the others, men and women of various ages, all with the same defeated posture. Some used hand gestures to communicate, but most kept their eyes down, focused only on their bland porridge. After breakfast, Catherine was assigned to the laundry, where she spent hours scrubbing sheets and towels until her hands were raw and red. The work was mind-numbing and exhausting, but it gave her time to observe and learn. By watching the other deaf residents, she began to pick up the formal sign language they used, different from what she had taught herself, but she was a quick study. Days turned into weeks. Catherine learned that the school was little more than a warehouse for those society deemed defective. Education was minimal, focused primarily on teaching basic skills and obedience. Catherine's refined Boston education meant nothing here. Her attempts to read books from the small library were discouraged. Mrs. Winters believed too much reading gave the residents ideas above their station. One evening, about a month after her arrival, Catherine was returning from the laundry when she noticed a commotion near the main entrance. A tall man in dusty clothes was arguing with Mrs. Winters. From her angle, Catherine could see his face clearly strong-jawed, weathered by the sun, with intense blue eyes beneath the brim of a worn cowboy hat. He appeared to be in his late 20s, his shoulders broad from physical labor. The man gestured toward the back of the building, but Mrs. Winters stood firmly, shaking her head. Catherine edged closer, trying to read their lips. "Need workers for the cattle drive," the man was saying. "Paying fair wages, just like last year." "Mr. Vaughn, I've told you," Mrs. Winters replied. "We are not a labor exchange. These people are here for their protection and care." The man, Mr. Vaughn, removed his hat, revealing dark hair that curled slightly at the ends. "Mrs. Winters, with all due respect, work gives people dignity. Your residents helped with the harvest last fall, and they seemed mighty pleased to earn their own money." Catherine moved closer, fascinated by the confrontation. Her foot caught on a loose floorboard and she stumbled slightly. Both Mrs. Winters and the cowboy turned toward the sound. "Mrs. Winter's face darkened. "Miss Price, return to your room immediately." But the cowboy was looking at Catherine with curiosity rather than the pity or discomfort she had grown accustomed to. He nodded slightly in acknowledgement, and Catherine found herself returning the gesture before hurrying away, feeling Mrs. Winter's glare burning into her back. That night, Catherine lay awake thinking about the encounter. There was something about the cowboy that had stirred a forgotten feeling within her hope. If residents had been allowed to work outside the institution before, perhaps there was a way she could escape the suffocating walls, even temporarily. The following day, Catherine was surprised to see Mrs. Winters approach her in the laundry room, her thin lips pressed together in obvious displeasure. "Miss Price," she said, "Mr. Vaughn has specifically requested workers who can handle detailed tasks. Given your background, you have been selected." Her expression made it clear this was not her preference. "You will report to the main entrance tomorrow at 7. Do not make me regret this decision." Catherine nodded, careful to keep her expression neutral while her heart raced with excitement. That night she barely slept, her mind filled with possibilities. Even a day away from the institution would be a precious freedom. The next morning, Catherine stood waiting at the entrance, wearing the cleanest of her gray dresses. 5 other residents joined her, 3 men and 2 women, all deaf or hard of hearing. Mrs. Winters handed each of them a folded paper. "Your instructions," she said. "Mr. Vaughn will return you by sunset. Any misbehavior will result in severe consequences." A wagon pulled up outside, and Catherine recognized the cowboy from the day before. Up close, he was even more imposing, tall and strong, with a quiet confidence in his movements. He tipped his hat to Mrs. Winters, who merely nodded stiffly in response. "Morning, folks," he said, looking at the assembled group. His eyes lingered on Catherine for a moment longer than the others. "I'm Vincent Vaughn. My ranch is about 4 miles east of town. We've got cattle to brand and accounts to organize before the drive next week. Appreciate your help." Catherine watched his lips carefully, noting how clearly he spoke, without the exaggerated movements people often used when they realized she was deaf. It was refreshing to be addressed normally. The ride to the ranch was the first time Catherine had been beyond the institution's walls since her arrival. She drank in the sight of the vast landscape, rolling hills covered in golden grass, distant mountains, and a sky so wide and blue it seemed impossible. The air smelled of dust and sage and freedom. Vincent's ranch was modest but well-maintained. A main house, a bunkhouse, a barn, and several corrals spread across a small valley with a creek running through it. Cattle grazed on the surrounding hillsides, and several cowboys were already at work moving animals from one pen to another. Vincent helped them down from the wagon, his hand strong and calloused as it briefly held Catherine's. He gestured toward a weathered man with a silver beard who approached them. "This is Earl, my foreman," Vincent said. "He'll show the men where they're needed for the branding." He turned to Catherine and the other woman. "Ladies, if you'll follow me to the house, Mrs. Hoskins, my housekeeper, has some indoor work that needs tending to." Catherine followed Vincent to the main house, a 2-story structure with a wide porch and actual glass windows, a luxury in this part of the territory. Inside, a plump woman with graying hair greeted them warmly. "These are the ladies from the institution, Mrs. Hoskins," Vincent said. "This is Martha," he indicated the older woman beside Catherine, and... He hesitated, looking at Catherine questioningly. Catherine realized he didn't know her name. She pointed to herself and mouthed Catherine slowly. "Catherine," he repeated, and she nodded. Mrs. Hoskins smiled. "Well, Catherine and Martha, we've got account books that need organizing and copying. Can you both write?" Martha shook her head, but Catherine nodded emphatically. "Excellent," Mrs. Hoskins said. "Catherine, you'll work with Mr. Vaughn in his office. Martha, you can help me with mending and preparing food for the men." Catherine followed Vincent to a small room off the main living area. A desk covered in papers occupied one corner, and bookshelves lined the walls, more books than the institution's entire library. "I'm afraid it's a bit of a mess," Vincent said, clearing space at the desk. Been meaning to get these cattle records in order before the drive to Wichita, but never seemed to find the time. He pulled out a chair for her, then sat across from her, organizing papers into piles. Basically, I need these records copied into the ledger in a clear hand. Think you can manage that? Catherine nodded, then hesitated before reaching for a pencil and blank sheet. She wrote quickly, I can read and write very well. I attended Miss Porter's school in Boston before I lost my hearing. Vincent read the note, his eyebrows rising slightly. Miss Porter's, that's mighty impressive. He studied her for a moment. If you don't mind my asking, how did you end up at Winter's place? Catherine's hand hovered over the paper. It was the first time anyone had asked about her past since she'd arrived in Colorado. She wrote, My father sent me away. He found my deafness embarrassing. Vincent's jaw tightened as he read. Well, that's about the most foolish thing I've heard. Nothing embarrassing about being deaf. Just means you communicate differently. The simple acceptance in his words washed over Catherine like a cool breeze. She smiled a real smile, the first in months, and began organizing the papers. They worked side by side for several hours. Vincent occasionally wrote notes asking her questions about the records, and Catherine responded with clear, concise answers. By midday, they had made significant progress, and Catherine was enjoying herself so much she was startled when Mrs. Hoskins appeared with a tray of food. Thought you two could use some dinner, she said, setting down plates of stew and fresh bread. You've been working hard. Thank you, Mrs. Hoskins, Vincent said. Catherine here has done more in 3 hours than I could have managed in 3 days. Mrs. Hoskins smiled warmly at Catherine. Well, it's nice to see the office looking less like a cyclone hit it. Eat up now while it's hot. When she left, Vincent turned to Catherine. Mrs. Hoskins has been with me since I started this ranch 5 years ago. Best cook in the territory, and she doesn't mind telling me when I'm being a fool, which is more often than I'd like to admit. Catherine smiled at his easy manner. She wrote, How did you become a rancher? Vincent read the note and leaned back in his chair. Came west after the war. I was just a boy when I served, lied about my age to join up. Afterward, couldn't stomach going back to Tennessee. Too many memories. Worked as a drover for a few years, saved every penny, then bought this land when nobody else wanted it. Turned out to have the best water source in the county, he shrugged. Been building it up ever since. Catherine nodded, then wrote, Why hire from the institution? Vincent's expression grew serious. My younger brother was born deaf. Folks didn't understand him, thought he was slow. I learned to sign so we could talk. His hands moved as he spoke, forming signs that Catherine recognized from the institution, but with subtle differences. He died of fever when he was 16, but he taught me more about courage than anyone I've ever known. Catherine felt tears pricking at her eyes. She picked up the pencil again. I'm sorry about your brother, and thank you for treating us like people, not burdens. Vincent read her words and nodded slowly. Mrs. Winters runs that place like a prison. I try to give folks there a chance to remember their more than their afflictions. He hesitated, then added, Would you like to learn some signs? The way my brother taught me, it's different from what they teach at the institution, more natural. Catherine nodded eagerly, and Vincent moved his chair closer. He started with simple signs: ranch, cattle, horses, hands moving fluidly. Catherine copied his movements, surprised at how intuitive they felt compared to the rigid, formal signs taught at the institution. They spent the afternoon alternating between organizing records and signing. Vincent was patient, correcting her gently when needed, his face lighting up when she mastered a new sign. By the time the sun began to lower in the sky, Catherine had learned dozens of words and phrases, and her hands moved with growing confidence. You're a natural, Vincent signed and spoke simultaneously. A habit, he explained, helped him think in both languages. Quick learner. Catherine signed thank you with a genuine smile. For the first time since losing her hearing, she felt truly seen, not as damaged or deficient, but as a person worthy of effort and connection. All too soon, it was time to return to the institution. As they rode back in the wagon, Catherine felt the weight of her captivity settling back onto her shoulders. Vincent seemed to sense her mood, nudging her gently with his elbow and signing smile with a wink when they arrived. Mrs. Winters was waiting at the entrance, her face set in its customary frown. "I trust there were no issues, Mr. Vaughn." "None at all, Mrs. Winters," Vincent replied. "In fact, Catherine here has a real talent for bookkeeping. I'd like to request her help again tomorrow if possible, Mrs." Winters looked surprised but nodded stiffly. "Very well, as long as her assigned chores are completed first." That night, Catherine lay in her narrow bed, replaying the day in her mind. Vincent's kindness, his acceptance of her deafness, the way he'd taught her to sign with such patience, it all stood in stark contrast to the coldness she'd known since losing her hearing. For the first time in years, she felt a flutter of something like happiness in her chest. The next morning, Catherine rushed through her laundry duties, earning suspicious glances from Mrs. Winters, who clearly disapproved of her enthusiasm. By mid-morning, she was in the wagon again, heading back to Vaughn Ranch with 3 other residents who had been requested for a second day of work. This time, Vincent was waiting on the porch when they arrived. He signed "Good morning" to Catherine, his hands moving smoothly through the air. She returned the greeting, feeling a rush of pleasure at communicating in this new way. "Thought we might finish those ledgers today," he said and signed simultaneously. "If we work quickly, I can show you around the ranch afterward." The day passed in a pleasant rhythm of work and conversation through writing and signing. Vincent taught her more signs while they worked the names of cattle breeds, ranching terms and expressions she'd never learned at the institution. By afternoon, they had completed the ledgers and Vincent stood, stretching his tall frame, ready for that tour. He asked, his blue eyes bright with an enthusiasm that matched her own. Catherine nodded eagerly, following him outside. The late September sun warmed her face as Vincent led her around the property, introducing her to the ranch hands and showing her the various buildings. He signed as much as possible, switching to writing notes when he needed to explain something more complex. At the corral, Vincent leaned against the fence, watching as his men worked with several horses. "Do you ride?" he asked, his hands forming the question. Catherine shook her head, writing quickly. "Never had the opportunity." Vincent grinned. "Well, that's something we ought to fix. Everyone in these parts should know how to ride." He gestured to a gentle-looking mare grazing nearby. "That's Daisy, sweetest horse on the ranch. Maybe next time you come, we could try a short lesson." The offer and the assumption that there would be a next time filled Catherine with warmth. She nodded enthusiastically. As they walked back toward the house, Vincent slowed his pace, his expression growing more serious. "Catherine," he said, making sure she could see his face clearly, "how long have you been at the institution?" She held up one finger, then pointed to the ground to indicate the passage of a month. "Just a month," Vincent looked surprised. "And before that, you were in Boston with your family." Catherine nodded, then wrote in her small notebook. "My father arranged everything after my mother's health began declining. He said caring for me was too much of a burden." Vincent's jaw tightened as he read. "That's not right," he said, his hands signing more forcefully than usual. "You're clearly intelligent and capable. You shouldn't be locked away in that place." Catherine sighed and wrote, "My father paid for 5 years. I have nowhere else to go, no money of my own." Vincent was quiet for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. Finally, he said, "Well, I need help with my accounts regularly. Mrs. Hoskins has been after me to hire someone. Maybe we can work something out with Mrs. Winters, have you come here more often." The suggestion sent hope surging through Catherine. She wrote quickly, "Do you think Mrs. Winters would allow it?" "She might, if there's money involved," Vincent replied with a wry smile. "That woman never turns down an opportunity for the institution to profit. Let me speak with her when we take you back today." True to his word, when they returned to the institution that evening, Vincent requested a private conversation with Mrs. Winters. Catherine waited anxiously in the foyer, trying to read their expressions through the partly open office door. When Vincent emerged, his face was carefully neutral, but he gave Catherine a small nod before leaving. Mrs. Winters followed him out, her thin lips pressed together in what might have been reluctant approval. "It seems Mr. Vaughn finds your skills useful," she said, scrutinizing Catherine. "He has proposed an arrangement whereby you would work at his ranch 3 days a week as an accounting assistant." The institution would receive compensation, of course. Catherine couldn't hide her excitement, which earned a disapproving look from Mrs. Winters. "Do not mistake this for freedom, Miss Price," she said coldly. "You remain under our care and supervision. Any misconduct will result in immediate termination of this arrangement." "Is that clear?" Catherine nodded solemnly, but inside her heart was soaring. 3 days a week away from the institution's walls, it was more than she had dared to hope for. The arrangement began the following week. Every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, Catherine would rise early, complete her essential chores, and then be permitted to walk the half-mile to Vincent's ranch, where she would spend the day organizing his business affairs and learning more signs. Vincent proved to be a patient teacher. He explained that the signs he knew were a mixture of formal signs and the unique language he had developed with his brother. "Sometimes," he told her, "you have to create your own words when the existing ones don't capture what you mean." Over the following weeks, Catherine flourished under this new routine. The work at the ranch was engaging, allowing her to use her education and intelligence in ways the institution never permitted. Vincent treated her not as a charity case, but as a valued employee, seeking her opinion on business matters and respecting her suggestions. One particularly warm October afternoon, Vincent made good on his promise to teach her to ride. He led Daisy, the gentle mare, to a small paddock and helped Catherine mount. The sensation of sitting atop the horse was both terrifying and exhilarating. "Just relax," Vincent signed, standing close beside her. "Daisy knows what she's doing, even if you don't yet." Catherine gripped the saddle horn tightly as Vincent led the horse in slow circles around the paddock. Gradually, her rigid posture eased, and she began to feel the rhythm of the horse's movements beneath her. "That's it," Vincent encouraged, his smile wide and genuine. "You're a natural." After several circuits, he handed her the reins. "Ready to try on your own?" Catherine hesitated, then nodded determinedly. Vincent stepped back, and Catherine gently squeezed her legs as he had shown her. Daisy moved forward obediently. The feeling of controlling the powerful animal filled Catherine with a sense of accomplishment she hadn't experienced in years. When she finally dismounted, her legs were wobbly, but her face was flushed with triumph. Vincent stood nearby, applauding silently, his expression full of pride. "You did wonderfully," he signed. "How did it feel?" Catherine's hands moved through the air, forming the signs for free and happy. Then, without thinking, she stepped forward and hugged him impulsively. Vincent stiffened in surprise for a moment before his arms came around her gently. Catherine pulled back quickly, embarrassed by her forwardness. In Boston society, such behavior would have been scandalous, a young woman embracing a man who was not her husband or relative. But Vincent merely smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "You deserve to feel free and happy all the time," he signed, his movements more deliberate than usual, as if emphasizing each word. That evening, as Catherine walked back to the institution, her thoughts were filled with Vincent, his kindness, his patience, the warmth in his blue eyes when he looked at her. She realized with a start that she was developing feelings for him, feelings that went beyond gratitude or friendship. The realization was both thrilling and terrifying. Vincent had given her no indication that he saw her as anything more than an employee or perhaps a friend, and even if he did share her feelings, what future could they possibly have? She was still legally bound to the institution for nearly 5 more years, still essentially property of her father's will. Winter arrived early that year, bringing snow and bitter cold to the Colorado high country. Catherine continued her work at the ranch, bundled in a warm coat Vincent had given her as a business expense, when he noticed her thin institution-issued shawl provided little protection against the elements. As Christmas approached, the atmosphere at the ranch grew festive. Mrs. Hoskins decorated the main house with evergreen boughs and red ribbons, and delicious smells wafted from the kitchen at all hours. Catherine found herself lingering longer each day, reluctant to return to the stark environment of the institution. On her last workday before Christmas, Catherine arrived to find Vincent waiting for her with an unusual request. I'm hosting Christmas dinner for my ranch hands and some folks from town who don't have family nearby, he explained, his hands moving through the signs they had practiced together. I'd like you to join us if Mrs. Winters will permit it. Catherine's heart leaped at the invitation, but she shook her head regretfully and wrote, Mrs. Winters never allows residents to leave for social occasions. Only work is permitted. Vincent's expression hardened. Well, then we'll just have to give her a reason to make an exception, he thought for a moment, then smiled. What if you were coming to help Mrs. Hoskins prepare the meal? That's work, isn't it? Catherine couldn't help but smile at his determination. She wrote, You would do that for me. Catherine, Vincent said, his expression suddenly serious as he set aside the paper to sign his response. I would do a great deal more than that for you. The intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. Could he possibly feel the same connection she did before she could respond, Mrs. Hoskins called Vincent away to deal with a delivery, leaving Catherine with her thoughts in turmoil. That evening, Vincent personally escorted her back to the institution to speak with Mrs. Winters. To Catherine's surprise, Mrs. Winters agreed to the Christmas arrangement, though not without expressing her disapproval of the irregular request. Catherine suspected that Vincent had included a generous donation to the institution's funds to secure her permission. Christmas Day dawned clear and cold. Catherine dressed in her best gray dress, still plain and institutional, but at least clean and pressed. Mrs. Hoskins greeted her warmly when she arrived at the ranch, immediately putting her to work rolling out pie crusts and peeling potatoes. The kitchen was warm and fragrant with the smells of roasting turkey and cinnamon. For the first time since losing her hearing, Catherine felt the true spirit of the holiday not in sounds she couldn't hear, but in the warmth of human connection and kindness surrounding her. As guests began to arrive in the afternoon, Catherine grew nervous. Would they stare at her? Would they find it awkward to communicate with her? Her fears proved unfounded. Vincent had apparently informed everyone about her deafness, and each guest made an effort to include her, speaking clearly so she could read their lips or using the simple signs Vincent had taught them. Dinner was served in the main dining room, with extra tables brought in to accommodate the 20 or so guests. Catherine found herself seated beside Vincent at the head of the table. The food was delicious, the company welcoming, and though Catherine couldn't hear the conversation flowing around her, she felt genuinely included. After the meal, everyone gathered in the living room where a tall pine tree stood decorated with handmade ornaments and candles. To Catherine's surprise, Vincent began distributing small gifts to everyone present, including her. When it was her turn, he handed her a small, carefully wrapped package. Catherine opened it slowly, conscious of curious eyes watching her. Inside was a beautiful leather-bound journal and a set of quality pencils. A small note was tucked inside the cover. It read, "For your thoughts which deserve to be preserved, with admiration, Vincent." Tears pricked at Catherine's eyes as she looked up at him. Vincent smiled softly, signing Merry Christmas where only she could see. Later, as the party was winding down and guests began to leave, Vincent found Catherine standing by the window, watching the snow fall in the fading light. "Did you enjoy yourself?" he signed. Catherine nodded enthusiastically, then reached for her new journal. She wrote, "This has been the most wonderful day I can remember. Thank you for including me." Vincent read her words and smiled. "I have something else for you," he signed, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a small book titled The American Sign Language Dictionary. "I sent away for this," he explained. "It's more complete than what I can teach you. I thought we could learn together, expand our vocabulary." Catherine took the book reverently, flipping through pages filled with illustrations of hand positions and movements. It was such a thoughtful gift, a recognition of her intelligence and desire to learn. "I have nothing to give you in return," she wrote apologetically. Vincent shook his head. "You've already given me something invaluable," he signed. "You've reminded me how to connect with someone again." He hesitated, then added, "After my brother died, I closed myself off, focused on the ranch, on building something lasting. I forgot what it was like to truly communicate with another person until you came along." Catherine felt a warm flush spreading across her cheeks at his words. Impulsively, she reached out and touched his hand, trying to convey her understanding. Vincent looked down at their joined hands, then back to her face. For a moment, Catherine thought he might lean closer, but the sound of Mrs. Hoskins calling his name broke the spell. He squeezed her hand once before stepping back. "I should see to my other guests," he signed apologetically. "The wagon will take you back at 8, as arranged with Mrs. Winters." Catherine nodded, watching him walk away with a mixture of happiness and longing. The day had been perfect, but it had also confirmed what she had suspected. Her feelings for Vincent ran much deeper than friendship or gratitude. Whether he returned those feelings remained uncertain, though the warmth in his eyes when he looked at her gave her hope. As winter deepened, Catherine's visits to the ranch continued despite the harsh weather. Vincent insisted on sending his wagon for her on the coldest days, ignoring Mrs. Winter's assertion that the arrangement would be suspended until spring. "Bookkeeping doesn't stop for snow," he told the matron firmly, "and I need Miss Price's expertise." Their work together took on a comfortable rhythm. In the mornings, Catherine would organize invoices and update ledgers while Vincent tended to ranch business. In the afternoons, they would often sit by the fire in his office, trading signs and stories through a combination of the sign language they were learning together and written notes. Catherine learned that Vincent had been just 17 when he joined the Union Army, lying about his age to enlist alongside his older cousin. He had fought in several major battles before being wounded at Gettysburg, a bullet through his left shoulder that still troubled him in cold weather. "That's why I came west," he explained. "Needed somewhere warm and dry for this old war injury." He grinned, making light of it, but Catherine could see the shadow of painful memories in his eyes. In turn, Catherine shared stories of her childhood in Boston, her education at Miss Porter's school, her love of literature and music before losing her hearing. She described how the world had changed for her after the scarlet fever, how people who had once engaged with her now spoke about her as if she weren't present. "It was like becoming invisible," she wrote, "or worse, becoming an object of pity and embarrassment." Vincent's expression darkened as he read her words. "People fear what they don't understand," he signed. "My brother faced the same ignorance, but you're not invisible to me, Catherine. I see you more clearly than anyone I've ever known." The intensity of his gaze made her heart race. These moments of connection between them were happening more frequently, charged with unspoken emotions that neither seemed ready to acknowledge fully. As February turned to March, the snow began to melt, revealing patches of mud and the first tentative green shoots of spring. Catherine's visits to the ranch increased to 4 days a week after Vincent convinced Mrs. Winters that the upcoming cattle drive required additional accounting preparation. One mild afternoon, Vincent suggested they take a break from work to enjoy the sunshine. He saddled Daisy for Catherine and his own gelding, Midnight, and they rode side by side along the creek that ran through his property. Catherine had become a confident rider under Vincent's tutelage, and she reveled in the freedom of movement, the wind in her hair, and the companionable silence they shared. They stopped at a scenic overlook where the land fell away into a valley dotted with early wildflowers. Vincent helped Catherine dismount, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. They stood close together, looking out over the landscape that was beginning to awaken from winter's sleep. "It's beautiful," Catherine signed, her hands moving gracefully through the air. "Yes, it is," Vincent replied, but he was looking at her, not the view. Catherine felt her cheeks warm under his gaze. She turned slightly, meeting his eyes, and found them filled with an emotion that made her breath catch. Slowly, deliberately, Vincent raised his hands and signed 3 words they had never used with each other before: "I love you." Catherine froze, certain she had misunderstood, but Vincent's expression was earnest, vulnerable. There was no mistaking his meaning. Her hands trembled as she raised them to respond, but Vincent gently caught them in his own. "You don't have to answer," he said, speaking aloud while still holding her hands. "I know this is unexpected. I know our situation is complicated, but I couldn't keep it inside any longer." He released her hands. I love your strength, your intelligence, your courage. I love the way you see the world, the way you've overcome every obstacle put in your path. Catherine's eyes filled with tears, not of sadness, but of overwhelming emotion. She had dreamed of hearing such words, but had never truly believed they could be meant for her, not since losing her hearing and being discarded by her family. With deliberate movements, she signed back, I love you too. The joy that broke across Vincent's face was like sunrise. He stepped closer, one hand gently cupping her cheek. May I kiss you? He asked, his lips forming the words clearly. Catherine nodded, and Vincent lowered his head slowly, giving her time to change her mind. Their lips met in a gentle, tender kiss that sent warmth flowing through her entire body. When they parted, Vincent rested his forehead against hers for a moment, his eyes closed as if savoring the connection. I've been wanting to do that for months, he admitted when he opened his eyes again, signing the words so she would understand perfectly. Catherine smiled, her heart too full for words. For the first time since losing her hearing, she felt not broken or incomplete, but wholly herself and wholly loved. They rode back to the ranch hand in hand, stopping occasionally to exchange kisses or simply to look at each other with wonder. The future was still uncertain. Catherine remained legally bound to the institution, and there would be obstacles to overcome, but in that moment, possibility seemed to stretch before them as vast and promising as the western horizon. When they returned to the ranch house, reality intruded in the form of Mrs. Hoskins, who informed them that a messenger had come from the institution. Mrs. Winters was requesting Catherine's immediate return due to an unexpected visitor. Did they say who? Vincent asked, a furrow appearing between his brows. Mrs. Hoskins shook her head, just that it was urgent. Catherine felt a sense of foreboding. In her experience, unexpected events rarely brought good news. Vincent insisted on driving her himself, his expression concerned as they made the short journey back to Silverdale. When they arrived at the institution, Catherine was shocked to see a familiar figure standing in the foyer. Mr. Reynolds, her father's assistant who had escorted her from Boston months ago. His presence could only mean news from her family, and given their willingness to send her away, she doubted it was positive. Mrs. Winters approached as they entered, her thin face showing unusual animation. Ah, Miss Price, there you are. Mr. Reynolds has traveled a great distance to speak with you. Catherine looked at Mr. Reynolds questioningly. He cleared his throat, uncomfortable as always in her presence. Miss Price, I regret to inform you that your father passed away 3 weeks ago. Pneumonia took him rather suddenly. Catherine felt a complex wave of emotions: shock, grief for the father who had once loved her before her deafness, and confusion about why Mr. Reynolds would travel so far to deliver this news. There is a matter of some delicacy to discuss, Mr. Reynolds continued, glancing at Mrs. Winters and Vincent with obvious discomfort. Perhaps somewhere private, Mrs. Winters led them to her office, where Catherine was surprised when Vincent followed, placing himself protectively at her side. Mrs. Winters raised an eyebrow but didn't object to his presence. Once seated, Mr. Reynolds extracted a document from his briefcase. Your father's will contain specific provisions regarding your situation, Miss Price. I must inform you that he has left instructions for your continued care at this institution, with funds allocated for the full 5 years originally agreed upon. Catherine felt her heart sink. Even in death, her father was ensuring she remained hidden away. However, Mr. Reynolds continued, there was a codicil added to the will just days before his passing. He adjusted his spectacles nervously. It seems your mother advocated on your behalf during your father's final days. The codicil states that should you wish to leave the institution for marriage or other appropriate arrangements, the remaining funds would be transferred to you directly as a dowry or living allowance. Catherine stared at him in disbelief. Her mother had intervened. After months of silence, after allowing her to be sent away, her mother had finally spoken up for her. Vincent leaned forward. Are you saying that Catherine is free to leave if she chooses? Mr. Reynolds nodded cautiously. Provided there is a suitable arrangement for her care, Mr. Price was most concerned that his daughter not be left without proper supervision given her condition. Vincent's jaw tightened at the word condition, but he kept his voice level. And who determines what constitutes a suitable arrangement? As executor of the estate, that would fall to me, Mr. Reynolds replied, though I would naturally consult with Mrs. Winters, who has overseen Miss Price's care these past months. Mrs. Winters straightened in her chair, clearly pleased to be granted such authority. I must say, Mr. Reynolds, while we have allowed Miss Price certain privileges due to her education and background, she remains a woman with a significant disability. Independent living would be quite impossible. Catherine reached for her notebook, writing rapidly. I have been managing Mr. Vaughn's accounts for months. I am perfectly capable of taking care of myself. Mr. Reynolds read her note with raised eyebrows. You've been working, Miss Price. Before Catherine could respond, Vincent spoke up. Catherine has been an invaluable asset to my ranch operations. She's intelligent, capable, and more independent than most hearing folks I know. He turned to face her directly. And if she'll have me, I'd like to offer her a permanent position as my wife. Catherine's eyes widened in shock. They had only just confessed their feelings hours ago, and now Vincent was proposing marriage in front of Mrs. Winters and Mr. Reynolds. Vincent seemed to read her surprise. He knelt before her chair, taking her hands in his. This isn't how I planned to ask, he signed and spoke simultaneously. But I've known for months that I want to spend my life with you. I love you, Catherine. Will you marry me? Catherine's eyes filled with tears as she nodded, too overwhelmed to sign or write a response. Vincent's face broke into a radiant smile, and he squeezed her hands gently before standing to face Mr. Reynolds again. There's your suitable arrangement, sir. I own a successful cattle ranch free and clear. I can provide Catherine with a comfortable home and a position of respect in the community, and I can communicate with her because I took the time to learn her language. Mr. Reynolds appeared taken aback by this unexpected development. Well, this is most irregular. I would need to verify your financial situation, Mr. Vaughn, and there would be paperwork. I'd be happy to provide whatever documentation you require, Vincent interrupted smoothly. My banker in town can vouch for my standing, Mrs. Winters, who had been watching the exchange with growing displeasure, finally spoke. This is absurd. Miss Price has been at our institution barely 6 months. Mr. Vaughn has known her only as an employee. A hasty marriage based on, she paused delicately, sentiment rather than practicality would hardly be in Miss Price's best interests. Catherine stood abruptly, drawing everyone's attention. She wrote firmly in her notebook, I am 20 years old, legally an adult. If my father's will permits me to leave with my funds, then the decision is mine alone to make. I choose to accept Mr. Vaughn's proposal. Mr. Reynolds read her declaration and sighed. Very well. I shall require certain financial assurances from Mr. Vaughn, and there will be legal documents to prepare. But if all is in order, I see no reason why your father's wishes regarding your freedom to marry should not be honored. Mrs. Winters pressed her lips into a thin line of disapproval but said nothing further. The matter was effectively settled. The following weeks passed in a whirlwind of preparations. Mr. Reynolds verified Vincent's financial standing and drew up the necessary documents to release Catherine from the institution and transfer her inheritance, a sum that surprised her with its generosity. It seemed her father had provided well for her materially, even as he had failed her emotionally. April arrived with warm breezes and blooming wildflowers, a perfect backdrop for a spring wedding. Catherine moved into Mrs. Hoskins' spare room temporarily, refusing to spend another night at the institution once the legal matters were settled. The wedding was planned for the 3rd Saturday in April. Vincent had offered to wait longer if Catherine preferred, but she saw no reason to delay their happiness. They had already lost too much time to circumstances beyond their control. On the morning of her wedding day, Catherine stood before the mirror in Mrs. Hoskins' room, hardly recognizing herself. Gone was the gray institutional dress, replaced by a gown of ivory silk that Vincent had ordered from Denver. Her dark hair was arranged in soft curls, adorned with small white flowers. Mrs. Hoskins appeared in the doorway, her round face beaming with approval. "You look beautiful, my dear," she said clearly, making sure Catherine could read her lips. Like an angel, Catherine smiled, grateful for the older woman's kindness. Over the past weeks, Mrs. Hoskins had become like family to her, filling a maternal void that Catherine hadn't realized was so painful until it began to heal. A soft knock at the door announced the arrival of an unexpected visitor, Martha, one of the deaf women from the institution whom Catherine had befriended. Mrs. Winters had grudgingly permitted her to attend the wedding, along with two other residents who had worked at the ranch. Martha's hands moved excitedly, signing that the church was filled with flowers and that Vincent looked very handsome in his new suit. Catherine laughed, signing back her nervousness and excitement. Another knock, more authoritative this time, revealed the local judge's wife, Mrs. Peterson, who had taken Catherine under her wing upon learning of the engagement. She would be escorting Catherine down the aisle in the absence of any family. "It's time, dear," Mrs. Peterson said, offering her arm. "Your groom is waiting, and I do believe he's the most nervous man in Colorado Territory today." The small church in Silverdale was indeed transformed, with spring wildflowers gathered from the hills around Vincent's ranch, arranged in simple but beautiful bouquets. As Catherine entered on Mrs. Peterson's arm, the assembled guests rose to their feet. She couldn't hear the traditional wedding music, but she could feel the vibration of it through the wooden floor, a rhythmic pulse that seemed to match her heartbeat. And then she saw Vincent, standing tall and handsome at the altar, his blue eyes fixed on her with such love and wonder that it took her breath away. As she walked toward him, everything else fell away: the guests, the church, the long journey that had brought her to this moment. There was only Vincent and the future they would build together. When she reached his side, Vincent signed, "You are beautiful," before taking her hands in his. The judge, who had worked with Vincent to ensure the ceremony would be accessible to Catherine, conducted the service with deliberate clarity, pausing frequently so Vincent could sign the important parts for her. When it came time for their vows, Vincent surprised everyone by setting aside the traditional words in favor of promises he signed directly to Catherine, speaking them aloud simultaneously for the guests. "I promise to be your voice when you need one, and to listen to your silence when you don't. I promise to learn new words every day so I can tell you all the ways I love you. I promise to build a home where your hands can speak as loudly as anyone's voice. I promise to stand beside you, before you, or behind you wherever you need me to be. With these hands, I pledge my life and my love to you." Tears streamed down Catherine's face as she watched his hands form these beautiful promises. When it was her turn, she had prepared to write her vows, but instead found the courage to sign them, with Vincent translating aloud for the guests. "I promise to love you with hands that speak and eyes that listen. I promise to show you every day that silence can be filled with meaning. I promise to be your partner in all things, to share your burdens and your joys. I promise to create a language of love between us that needs no words. With these hands, I give you my heart, now and forever." There wasn't a dry eye in the church as they exchanged rings, simple gold bands that symbolized their unbroken commitment. When the judge pronounced them husband and wife, Vincent gently cupped Catherine's face and kissed her with tender passion, sealing their vows in the most universal of languages. The celebration afterward at the ranch was joyous and relaxed. Catherine danced with her new husband, following the vibrations of the music through the floorboards and the gentle guidance of Vincent's hands. They moved together as if they'd been dancing all their lives, their bodies finding a natural harmony that needed no sound. As evening fell and the last guests departed, Vincent led Catherine to the main house, their home now. He had renovated the master bedroom while she stayed with Mrs. Hoskins, creating a bright, beautiful space with large windows that overlooked the mountains. "Welcome home, Mrs. Vaughn," he signed, his face alight with happiness. Catherine smiled, still getting used to her new name. "It's perfect," she signed back. Vincent took her hands, his expression growing more serious. I want you to know something. This is your home now, not just mine. I've set up an account in your name with part of the ranch profits. You're my wife, my partner in everything." Catherine was touched by his thoughtfulness. In a time when married women rarely controlled their own finances, Vincent was ensuring she would never again be dependent on someone else's goodwill. "Thank you," she signed, "for seeing me as an equal." "You're not my equal," Vincent replied with a teasing smile. "You're much better with the bookkeeping. I'm just the cowboy who's lucky enough to have won your heart." That night, as they lay together in the soft darkness, Vincent's arms around her and his heartbeat steady against her cheek, Catherine felt a sense of peace she had thought lost forever. The journey that had begun with her being sent away in shame had led her to this moment of profound belonging. Spring gave way to summer, and Catherine fully embraced her new life as Mrs. Vaughn. She continued managing the ranch accounts, but expanded her role to include correspondence with cattle buyers and suppliers. Word spread in the territory about the deaf woman whose business acumen was helping Vaughn Ranch prosper, and soon other ranchers were asking if she might review their books as well. Vincent encouraged her to take on these additional clients. "You have a gift," he told her. "People trust you because you see details others miss." By autumn, Catherine had established a small accounting business operating from an office Vincent built for her adjacent to their home. She hired Martha from the institution as an assistant, teaching her bookkeeping skills and giving her a chance at independence that Mrs. Winters would never have permitted. Their home became known in Silverdale as a place where deaf people were welcome. Vincent and Catherine hosted regular gatherings where both deaf and hearing residents came together, learning to communicate across the divide that had once seemed insurmountable. Several of the townspeople began learning sign language, inspired by the obvious love and connection between the Vaughns. Mrs. Winters observed these developments with tight-lipped disapproval, but even she could not deny that Catherine had flourished outside the institution's walls. When Catherine and Vincent offered to fund a proper teacher for the deaf residents, someone who would teach them useful skills rather than mere compliance, Mrs. Winters reluctantly agreed the offer of financial support, too tempting to refuse. In December, as their first Christmas as a married couple approached, Catherine received an unexpected letter from Boston. Her mother, whose health had been the stated reason for sending Catherine away, was planning to visit Colorado in the spring. The letter was formal, tentative, but contained an undercurrent of regret that Catherine had never expected to see from the woman who had stood silently by while her husband exiled their daughter. "Will you see her?" Vincent asked after reading the letter. Catherine considered the question carefully. The pain of her parents' rejection still lingered, but the happiness she had found with Vincent had healed much of the wound. "Yes," she signed finally, "not for her sake, but for mine. I want her to see that being deaf didn't make me less, it just made me different." Vincent nodded, pulling her into an embrace. "She'll see a strong, successful woman who happens to be the love of my life." Catherine smiled against his chest, grateful beyond words for this man who had learned her hands like a second language, who had seen her value when others saw only her limitations. Spring came again, bringing with it Catherine's mother, Elizabeth Price, a thin, elegant woman whose facade of Boston propriety barely concealed her nervousness. She arrived at the ranch with trunks of expensive clothes and the weight of unspoken guilt evident in her every gesture. The reunion was initially awkward. Elizabeth had made no effort to learn sign language, so communication happened through written notes and Vincent's translation. But as days passed, something unexpected occurred. Elizabeth began to watch Catherine and Vincent signing to each other, asking what certain gestures meant, attempting to replicate them with her own hands. "I should have done this years ago," she admitted one evening, her hands forming the clumsy signs for "I'm sorry" that Vincent had taught her. "I failed you, Catherine. I let your father convince me that sending you away was for your own good when it was really for his convenience." Catherine's eyes filled with tears at this belated acknowledgement. She wrote in response, Why did you intervene at the end? Why add the codicil to his will? Elizabeth's composure faltered. When he was dying, I finally found the courage to confront him about what we had done to you. I told him that if he had any hope of redemption, he needed to give you back your freedom and your future. She dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. It was too little, too late, but I hoped it might give you a chance at happiness. It did, Catherine wrote, glancing at Vincent with a smile, though I would have found it with or without father's permission. Elizabeth stayed for a month, gradually becoming more comfortable with sign language and developing a tentative relationship with the daughter she had once abandoned. When she departed for Boston, she left with a promise to return, and Catherine found herself believing it might actually happen. As their second year of marriage unfolded, Catherine and Vincent expanded their efforts to improve conditions at the institution. They established a fund to provide education and vocational training for the residents, insisting that Mrs. Winters hire qualified teachers who respected the intelligence and capabilities of the deaf students. In the autumn of that year, Catherine discovered she was expecting their first child. The news filled them both with joy and a touch of apprehension. Would the baby be born hearing or deaf? Would Catherine be able to hear her child's cries? It doesn't matter, Vincent assured her, his hands moving with fierce certainty. Our child will be loved completely, exactly as they are. Just as I love you, exactly as you are. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, with Mrs. Hoskins fussing over Catherine like a mother hen, and the entire community of Silverdale taking a proprietary interest in the upcoming arrival. Even Mrs. Winters unbent enough to send a handmade blanket for the baby, a peace offering of sorts after years of tension. On a warm June evening in 1878, after a day of summer rain had cleared the air and brought out the scent of sage and wildflowers, Catherine gave birth to a daughter. They named her Emma Grace Vaughn, a name that Catherine could say aloud despite her imperfect speech, a gift to her daughter and to herself. Emma was born with perfect hearing, but that fact seemed almost incidental to her parents. From her earliest days, Vincent signed to her as naturally as he spoke, teaching her that language could be seen as well as heard. As she grew, Emma became fluent in both spoken English and sign language, moving effortlessly between her parents' worlds. By the time Emma was 3, the Vaughn Ranch had become not just a cattle operation but a community center for the deaf in Colorado Territory. Catherine's accounting business had expanded to include a school where deaf children and adults could learn practical skills, and Vincent had become known throughout the region as an advocate for deaf rights and education. Catherine's mother visited regularly, eventually selling the Boston house to relocate permanently to a small cottage on the Vaughn property. She devoted herself to her granddaughter and to making amends for her past failures, learning sign language fluently despite her advanced age. One evening, as Catherine sat on the porch watching Vincent teach Emma to ride her first pony, she felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over her. The path that had led her here had been marked by pain and rejection, but it had ultimately brought her to a place of belonging and purpose. Vincent looked up, catching her eye across the yard. With one hand steadying Emma on the pony, he used the other to sign a message meant only for her. I love you more each day, Catherine signed back. You gave me a voice when the world tried to silence me. Vincent smiled, the same smile that had first given her hope in the darkest days at the institution. It was the smile of a man who had learned her hands like a second language, who had seen beyond her deafness to the woman beneath. As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Catherine reflected on the journey that had brought her from isolation to this moment of perfect belonging. She had been sent away for being deaf, but she had found her way home to a love that transcended words, to a life rich with meaning and purpose, to a family bound not by blood alone but by understanding, respect, and boundless love. In the years that followed, Catherine and Vincent would welcome 2 more children, twin boys who brought joyful chaos to their ordered lives. They would expand their advocacy work, helping to establish schools for the deaf throughout the Western Territories. They would face challenges and setbacks, as all families do, but they would face them together, their hands speaking a language of love that needed no sound to be perfectly understood. And on quiet evenings, when the work was done and the children were asleep, they would sit together on the porch of the home they had built, watching the stars appear in the vast Colorado sky, their hands entwined in the most eloquent silence, two people who had found in each other not just love, but true understanding. For Catherine, who had once believed her deafness had rendered her invisible, these moments were the greatest gift of all: to be seen, to be known, to be loved completely, without condition or reservation. Vincent had learned her hands like a second language, but in doing so, he had taught her the most important lesson of all: that love speaks in many voices, and the most powerful ones are often silent.